Good morning. My name is Anne-Marie McCaskill Davis. I'm the Cultural Funding Specialist Senior with the City of Austin's Cultural Arts Division. Today we are reviewing Elevate nonprofit applications for the Elevate Review Panel. This is the second one on September 9th, 2024. Our tech pilot is Maya Williams-Britton. She is also a Cultural Funding Specialist with the City of Austin's Cultural Arts Division. And we also have Priscilla Hale with us today. She is our equity facilitator. I'm going to share with the applicants the instructions that have been provided to the panelists before we begin the panels. So the panelists have reviewed all applications and given preliminary scores and comments prior to today. They have the opportunity to change their scores during this session, and scores will be finalized by the end of the day. We are allotting 10 minutes maximum per application. I will be monitoring that timer. If any technical issues arise, I will stop the timer and the recording until those are resolved, and then we'll continue where we left off. We've instructed the panelists not to repeat comments that have already been said. We are not asking the panelists to score on consensus, so they may have divergent opinions about applications that we're reviewing. We've also asked the panelists not to announce a numeric score. They are to provide overall application comments. Their comments should align with the review criteria, which is established in the scoring rubric for the Elevate program, which has been available on the Elevate website since the program launched earlier this summer. They should not be taking into consideration things that are not within the scoring rubric. Things like financial need or geographic service area are not considerations. We've also asked the panel to look beyond grantsmanship. They are allowed to use firsthand experience. So if they're familiar with an applicant, they can bring that information to the panel. They are also allowed to review the website of the applicant, but it is not a requirement. It was not something that we required all panelists to do, but it's okay if they are to go there to an applicant's website and glean some additional information that may not have been included in the application. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will recuse themselves from the live review. They have not reviewed that application. By recusing themselves, they're turning off their camera, turning off their microphone. I will invite those panelists back to the dais once we have finalized scores for that applicant and before moving on to the next application. So we do have one panelist who is recusing themselves from this first application. There have been primary and secondary reviewers assigned to every application. This does not mean that those are the only two panelists who have reviewed applications. It's essentially a mechanism for us to ensure that there is someone who is prepared to speak and introduce an application to the rest of the panel. And then the secondary is just to ensure that there's a secondary set of comments that are provided when reviewing the application. We will open up the floor to the rest of the panelists to provide any additional comments once the primary and secondary have concluded their comments. So with that, we will go ahead and begin our panel review. The first application up for review is the Tiny Minotaur. Veronica is the primary, TJ is the secondary. Dylan has a conflict, so has recused himself from the dais. Let me set up the timer. One moment, please. All right, Veronica, whenever you're ready, you may begin. When you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
Hi, can everyone hear me all right? We're good? Okay, fantastic. The Tiny Minotaur is a relatively new organization. They were established in 2020 and they've had an outdoor brick and mortar space since 2023. They provide sort of an immersive, fantasy-focused creative space, and their programming is really a wide variety of events. There's theater, musical performances, workshops, live action role-playing, and makers markets. For the grants, they are requesting $80,000 to support their 2024-2025 season, which includes two kind of grand theatrical productions and 30 additional public events, so a very full season. Overall, I found this to be a very strong application. They received high marks in most areas. One thing that I found particularly compelling and important was their decision to not charge a rental fee to creatives who want to produce their own events in the space. Anyone who's tried to rent a creative space in Austin knows that that can be a major barrier to presenting your work to the public. And so that was really impactful for me. They had a professed background in harm reduction, and I really kind of saw that in their thoughtful approach and their deep commitment to accessibility, both in terms of disability and language inclusivity. I was especially impressed with how they had different ways for people to communicate through people who were hard of hearing or people who had different languages. They had people on staff, they had ways to write, they had pointed signage, so there was more than one way to get the message across, which is really key to true accessibility. And I was especially impressed with their plans, their future plans for expanding wayfinding support for the visually impaired, and I thought that to be a very thoughtful and practical accommodation. I did note, however, that in the actual budget, there was not a specific line item for accessibility. And I know a lot of that is part of their, staffing in general, but accessibility is a key priority, and a strict interpretation of the rubric would result in that section not getting the high score because of that lack of line item. So I'd be interested to hear thoughts from other panelists and also perhaps from the facilitator about how that interpretation might impact the score, where it's not a line item, but it's kind of clearly presented in the text of the rest of the application. But overall, I believe the Tiny Minotaur's mission aligns really closely with the equity-focused goals of the Elevate grant.
Yeah, I am largely in agreement with Veronica. My name is TJ, and I'm the secondary on this application. And I'm so happy that we're starting with this application because it's always nice to start on a positive note. And I really did think that this organization just looked great to me on paper. In addition to some of the things that Veronica pointed out, like the not charging for rent, I just overall got a sense of a kind of effortless diversity in their activities. And what I mean by that is when you are an artist or you're working in the arts, depending on your medium, depending on your focus, maybe you're a solo artist, when you come up against a grant application like this, where certain communities and populations are prioritized, you might have to think really, really hard about how you're going to engage those communities. And that's appropriate, and that's a good thing. In the case of this application, though, it seems to me that the events that they put on and the people that they represent are truly an enormous swath of different walks of life, different personalities, different communities, differently abled people. And so that's what I mean by effortlessness. And to me, that reflects an overall kind of vibrancy that the city should absolutely prioritize in funding. That's my opinion, of course. Where I thought the application was a little lacking, maybe some critique for future applications, in describing the leadership, how the board is comprised, all of the right kind of thoughtfulness and language was there for me, but it wasn't quite as transparent as I had hoped. They worked with percentages, which can be a little bit misleading. For example, if I have a 2-member board and one person identifies as queer, technically my board is 50% LGBTQ, which seems a lot more impressive than that particular example is. So just for future applications, maybe a little more detail about who exactly are these people on your board would have gotten a few more points from me in my review process. The other thing that I would like to see as you kind of develop this project, if you do get the funding, is in your marketing budget. I tend to think of the grant awardees for something like this as not just winners in their own right, but as conduits to so many other important nonprofit organizations here in Austin. And I found your marketing plan to be a little bit heavy on the kind of digital, social media, internet side of things. And I just wanted to point out that we have so many incredible nonprofit print media organizations like the Austin Chronicle, radio stations, we have public access television. there are so many opportunities to kind of channel some of those city funds to a more diverse marketing approach. But overall, I echo Veronica's sentiment. This is an incredibly strong application, and it was a pleasure to read and learn about the Tiny Minotaur.
Thank you, Veronica and TJ. And before I invite other folks, for Veronica's question, I think if what we've talked about is if the information is there, then we're okay with that. I think if there's anything around the budget, the way the actual budget is being presented, then the city, if awarded funding, then the city can work with the organization around ensuring that their budget matches up to what it needs to be so that they can pay for and do the things that they need to do around that. I do want to say this because this has come up a few times. TJ, you mentioned to them about the transparency of their board, and applicants do submit information in this application that is much more transparent. However, you all as reviewers do not see that information. So a good thing for applicants to know is that the city staff sees that information, but reviewers do not. So given that that's something that folks have been asking about and needing a little more transparency, it would be good to also include that in the narrative section around your board. So I just want to say that I can see things because I can see the back end, but I just want to make that transparent because folks might think, oh, well, I have all the information there. It's there. It's very transparent, but it's not visible to the reviewer. So we just want to, for applicants in the future, to really keep that piece in mind. So at this time, I'd like to invite any other panelists that have any additional comments that they would like to add.
I would like to say something. I agree with TJ and Veronica about the strength of this application overall. One area that I thought maybe could be a little bit improved was on the description of the public activity, where they talk about particularly the two major productions around theater. I would like to know a little bit more about what those are and who is making them, who's responsible for them, how those are might be communicating stories from particular audiences, or how, who's in charge of those productions. Right now, there's just kind of one sentence around it will provide opportunities to local marginalized artists and performers to be fairly paid, which is great, but I would just like to have a little bit more information and details there to understand how those particular events and how they're involved with the key constituency groups that the city is prioritizing. But otherwise, I think a very strong application.
Thank you, Cynthia. Anybody else?
Okay, seeing no additional comments, panelists, you may finalize your scores. And if you'll just give me a nod or a head nod or a hands up or a thumbs up or wave. Let me know you're ready. Okay, thank you. And Cynthia, just let me know when you're ready. Okay. Was that not that meaning that you are ready? Or that you need more time? Okay, great. Okay, great. All right, Dylan, you can go ahead and come back. All right, the next application up for review is Austin Camerata. Gail is the primary, Veronica is the secondary. Gail, I have the timer all set, so when you begin speaking, I will start the timer. And you're muted, Gail.
Okay, all right, so Austin Camerata, let's see. Let's see, I'm looking for their Their mission is to reimagine chamber music through creative concerts, artistic collaborations, and community outreach. They're guided by their artistic goal to delight and surprise the most avid classical music fans while making classical music accessible to those who might consider it stuffy or boring. It employs 36 local artists each season. Their constituencies are the artists, the partners who host and engage them for performances, and the audiences. It includes collaborations with other arts organizations, allowing them to create truly unique experiences. Educational partners collaborate to present musical story times for their patrons, with the hopes of inspiring a lifelong interest in music with young children. So their particular project for this grant is their 2024-25 season. Their which is significant. They have several events here, and it centers around equity by democratizing access to high quality artistic experiences and creating performances that reflect and celebrate the rich cultural diversity of Austin. Their board includes a mix of longtime classical musicians, an artist representative, and business professionals with little musical background who bring distinct viewpoints to the table when providing guidance to their decision-making processes. Their founders are responsible for making the creative decisions and made up of 3 co-directors that maintain a culture of shared decision-making and open communication. The artists, partners, and audience members or other constituencies are encouraged to voice authentic feedback. So in looking at their application, the criteria that was set up by the city of Austin, their artistic mission, in my opinion, their artistic mission is not necessarily rooted in serving communities that are at risk of cultural erasure and displacement, or been institutionally marginalized. Now, that may be evident in the artists. That may be something that is addressed when the artists who are part of their programming. However, when I looked at the materials, it was not easy to determine whether their diversity goals were, and it was not evident. But it looks like they've got a strong performing season. So, and I think that they've had, they say that they have attracted audience of more than 5,000 since 2017. So I think they had a strong application, except for those issues of the funding priorities for Austin are not necessarily met in this particular application.
I'd like to echo some of what Gail said. Camerata clearly demonstrates a commitment to preserving chamber music and to, performing it in unique and non-traditional spaces. Like, their mission is very clear, and it's clear that they're executing their mission well. However, I think the application overall could have been strengthened with just more specificity on how these efforts directly engage with the equity goals of the Elevate grants. more precise demographic information. And Priscilla, thank you for letting us know that they do give demographics that we can't see. I think that might be confusing on both ends and maybe something to reconsider moving forward in terms of the structure of the application. But more precise demographic information, such as percentage of audience members, performers, or board members from communities at risk of cultural erasure or historically marginalized groups, it would give a lot clearer picture of their impact and how it aligns with the funding goals of Elevate. The application did mention goals around accessibility and performing non-traditional works, and that's absolutely admirable, but without concrete examples or data to illustrate how they're getting to those goals, it's hard to score them on something they're trying to do without knowing how they're going to do it or if it's being executed. And so I just want to encourage Camerata to continue their work, but in future applications to just be much more specific in the details of how your efforts are reaching out to the key constituencies that are the focus of this particular granting program.
Thank you, Veronica. I will add that in the application, it does specifically state to the folks that that information is not viewable to you all as reviewers. So, it might not imply to folks that it would make it stronger in the narrative. So which is why I'm saying it now, so that folks who are on the call could hear that. And I do think that, just making it clear that they, can say that in the narrative. At this time, I'd like to invite other panelists to offer any other or additional comments that you may have. Dylan, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. I feel like the mission statement of Camerata really differed from a lot of the other sections. And I think that it was really more in alignment with the goals of the grant. However, in other sections, this application would have benefited from explicitly naming the specific constituencies at risk of erasure or displacement in Austin that their project is serving. And if they had only taken that kind of consideration of equity, I feel like it could have been a very strong application. But sadly, that was not present, and I couldn't find it in any of the supporting materials in evidence. So that is my feedback.
Thank you. Sounds like you're in alignment, because I think that's what the other two panelists have also said, is that the number one piece around who the funding is for is cultural erasure and displacement. So any other folks have anything?
I have one thought. I think maybe Veronica, you mentioned that you didn't feel they were specific around accessibility. And I kind of had the opposite impression when I read it. I thought they had all of their work was like dependent on getting the grant funding, and they mentioned partnering with music therapy services to provide like sensory friendly productions or sensory friendly adaptations. And they also talked about working with a Spanish language interpreter for their story times in order to translate. So while I agree with the rest of the critiques of the application, I personally found that their accessibility in both language and disabilities were strong.
Any additional?
I would agree with Cynthia regarding the language accessibility, but I feel like the other accessibility issues, the other section, there could have been more creative like implementation of consideration for people that may be mobility impaired or that might be hearing impaired.
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. While y'all are finalizing scores, just make one clarifying comment about the accessibility section. We don't expect applicants to serve every disability community. It would be ultimately impossible for anyone to do. We encourage them to pick one. They can pick more than one if they so choose, but specifically call out how they are what that community specifically is and how specifically they're providing a professional level of service to be as inclusive and welcoming as possible for that community. And that applies for both the accessibility and language accessibility questions. And then as you're finalizing your scores, if you'll give me a thumbs up, a wave, or a nod to know if you're ready to go. Okay. All right, moving on. Veronica, are you ready to go? Are you still working? Okay, great. The next application up for review is Gilbert and Sullivan Austin. Dylan is the primary, Gail is the secondary. Dylan, whenever you're ready, the timer is set, so I'll start it once you begin speaking.
Okay, Gilbert and Sullivan project. Um, here's some of the comments that I had noted from when I was reviewing it before. It seems this project reaches for diversity. It's unclear though, like in a lot of the sections, how those efforts are expressed. And so I would have scored higher for this application if included in it would have been like explicitly describing the specific key constituencies that the project is serving. Um, and uh, and are those like an exploration of equity and like are those constituencies at risk of immediate displacement or cultural erasure in Austin? And and then like who is being what constituencies are involved in the production, like that whose voices are being elevated and who are being served by the production. Um, I think that a higher score could have been given to this application if it was like more the people applying were more thoroughly researching the issues of equity in Austin and considering that and considering what key priority constituencies that that their project serves or that are included in the production, like as far as like elevating people's voices. Um, and because there's a lot of issues like this here in Austin, and also addressing how the project serves those communities, like pretty much in every answer, like explicitly, you know. Um, and maybe also a consideration of like thoroughly answering each section. I know we're not grading on grantsmanship, and I've taken that into consideration. But I feel like there could have been more information and more extrapolation on some of the sections. Um, I did look into the website and social media. And fortunately, there was a video showing many of the projects like supported by the organization. And from this, I could infer that the project is more in alignment with the grant guidelines than I could really have suspected based on the text alone. So fortunately, I did have time to look into their website and to explore that a bit. So, like having ha like having and like explicit explanations of the kinds of situations that I saw represented, like different, like diverse people involved in the production and in the audience, you know, if that was explicitly stated in the answers to the questions, it would have probably gained more points. But fortunately, I was able to see that and give them credit for the what they are actually doing, you know. So that those are my main points.
And I thought, too, I was looking at their some of their what they attached, and if I remember correctly, that it was mostly still pictures, but their costuming is outstanding. I didn't hear any of the work samples. I was interested in the description of the that particular Gilbert and Sullivan production of Mikado that that they felt was a negative stereotype of Japanese culture. And I also wondered about the in school, with traditions like this, Gilbert and Sullivan, is it I guess it seems like there's an assumption made that BIPOC audiences on a larger scale may not appreciate their programming. And so it's almost like we'll do kind of the minimum, but another thing is how do you educate the audiences? And I'm not sure that they are really reaching out to an educational way to talk about Gilbert and Sullivan and its relevance in today's society. So, and I'm not sure even if that's their responsibility, but I think that it would definitely increase their audiences if people understood why these productions are so important.
Thank you. I'd like to invite other panelists to offer up any other comments that you may have.
I'll just add to a little bit of what Gail was saying about relevance here. And from my own perspective, reading this application, it was difficult for me to try to decide if it is relevant to produce a 100-plus-year-old play in 2024, except for the purpose of edifying the fans of this material, which they described in their application. To my mind, there are a lot of different creative opportunities here for bringing material from the past to the present in a way that doesn't just like subvert the cultural biases of the previous era, like with the Japanese play, but I could imagine a Gilbert and Sullivan play with an all-black cast, for example, and I think that would have been an incredible proposition in this application. So I was also missing a little bit of the relevance in terms of what the city is prioritizing funding with this money.
Thank you, TJ. Any other panelists have anything?
I was really struck by something they said in the language portion, which was the works of Gilbert and Sullivan were written in English to be performed in English, period. But earlier in the application, they did reconsider a work through a modern lens. So it seemed inconsistent to me about where they were holding strong and where they were willing to address equity within these works. And I think if they took that sort of imaginative approach that they did with the Mikado and applied it to also language, what's wrong with presenting something in a language other people can understand? It doesn't, if you're working with a good translator, you're opening up to new audiences. So I felt like it was not like their adherence to equity goals was inconsistent throughout the application and also expressed inconsistently.
Now, I just wanted to say one thing about that because regarding language, because when I went to their website, like they had this really cool video that was a Spanish language video based on Gilbert and Sullivan's work. And so that's another case of like they didn't have it in the application. They could have put that there, but because they didn't, like I had to really dig to find it, and you didn't see it. So, but if they would have only like described that they had helped produce this, it would have been a huge like revelation that they are like considering like language accessibility.
Thank you. And I think that speaks to the inconsistencies that Veronica just brought up. But I also, I just want to state this for applicants that, folks are not required to go to your websites. They're not required to look at any of that. So you really want to try to make your case for and answer these questions in a way that if folks don't have an opportunity to do that, then but it's easily accessible in this space. Cynthia, I wanted to make sure that were you trying to say something earlier? Okay. Would any other panelists have anything they'd like to add at this point?
Okay, please finalize your scores. And just give me a nod or a wave or a thumbs up when you're ready. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right, up next is Prizer Arts and Letters. Cynthia is the primary, Dylan is the secondary. The timer is all set, so Cynthia, when you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
Okay, so overall, I thought this was a very strong application. Prizer is a gallery space in East Austin, committed to centering marginalized artists such as those that come from the BIPOC or LGBTQ plus communities. They're requesting $80,000 to fund 6 shows throughout the year, with accompanying programming, and a majority of the artists featured are coming from coming from communities that are at risk of cultural erasure as deemed by the city of Austin. They have a really strong understanding of their key constituencies, and that was reflected throughout the application. I felt every answer really spoke to that. Their intersectional identities and a history of service that backs up all of this, particularly their leadership team, I thought was really strong. And so I gave them really high scores in all of those areas. And their marketing and accessibility plans were comprehensive and thoughtful and seemed to go above and beyond what was the bare minimum required. I've also personally been to some shows at Prizer and have like firsthand experience of seeing not only the type of artists that they feature and whose work they show, but also the audience that they attract and the way in which they include the local East Austin community, which, as we all know, is deeply gentrified and is becoming inaccessible to folks from all different kinds of walks of life. And so I really appreciated Prizer's application overall and thought it was very strong.
Yes, I agree with everything that Cynthia has stated regarding this application. I feel like they really knocked it out of the park, like super duper in alignment with the priorities of the grant process. And really the only thing that I found was that the only section where I thought they could have done better was in their marketing plan. And although it was very thorough, more points would have been awarded for a concrete plan that included efforts to reach audience members with disabilities or audience members whose primary language is not English. That would be implemented instead of by their actual organization, because they mentioned something about it would be implemented by a not partner, but they weren't specific on who that partner was. So that's really like the only thing that I found that wasn't 100% in alignment with the grant priorities.
Thank you both. Would like to offer up opportunity for other panelists to add any additional comments.
I just would like to add that I found it significant that they help their artists with production costs. It is very common as a creative artist to lose money on a show, even if you sell work, because it costs so much to put on a show and to prepare the work. And I think that that's the type of support that creatives need in order to ensure they can keep working in Austin. And that's the point of the grant overall.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Okay, if there are no additional comments, You may finalize your scores. All right, Gail and Dylan, you're all set. We're still working. Okay, great. The next application up for review is Salvage Vanguard Theater. Emily is the primary, Cynthia is the secondary. Veronica has a conflict, so she's turned off her mic and turned off her camera. We will invite her back once we have finalized scores for this application. Emily, I have set the timer, so whenever you begin speaking, I will start it.
Awesome. Okay, so the Salvage Vanguard Theater is an experimental performance art company that seems to have diverse programming and inclusivity at the very heart of everything they do. They really did a good job, I feel like, answering every question pretty thoroughly. And it seems that this has been priorities for them since they were founded in 1994. They produce works from artists of all different backgrounds, and not only are they inclusive in the creatives that they work with, but they also are inclusive to folks who want to come out and enjoy their programming, offering pay what you wish options for attendance. They seem to really emphasize community involvement and engaging their artists and constituents at every level of programming through collaborations in the types of works they produce, as well as getting community feedback on, from audiences as well. And they seem to have a lot of great professional development opportunities for the artists they work with, which I think is really important based on this grant. Their organizational leadership consists of folks from a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences, and I think their proposed programming for this upcoming year reflects that as well. One thing that stuck out to me is they were able to describe the leadership folks and their board and decision makers by not only sharing the demographic information, but also really showing how those folks represent their constituents and how they can work with their community and kind of what experience they bring to that. Again, going back to making their programs accessible through costs as well as physical accessibility, using accessible venues. And they were one of the applications that I noticed actually have an accessibility coordinator on staff. And make that contact information available easily to all people who want to attend. They have ASL and Spanish translators for programming that involves audience participation, and they also provide written programs in Spanish as well. It seems like they've built a lot of community partnerships with other organizations that highlight LGBTQ and BIPOC organizations as far as their marketing goes. Overall, I thought this was a really strong application. They answered everything thoroughly, and it seems like this has been kind of core to their programming since they were founded. So I thought they did a great job.
Yeah, I echo that. I thought this was a great application. Just a couple other things to note. One thing that stood out to me was how clearly the proposal centers, not only just centers like BIPOC and queer voices, but also includes them in every step along the way in production, and just really how deeply that those identities inform the work that is made. And the other thing that I thought was really cool about this application was not only were they providing Spanish language translation, but they also provided Nahuatl, which is an indigenous language, which is very difficult to I don't know that I've seen that really in Austin very much. I've seen it in Mexico, but here is, so I thought that was just an example of them doing deeply impactful and really supporting a very marginalized community. And so I thought that just was a demonstration of them just going above and beyond and serving.
Thank you. Would like to invite any other panelists to add additional comments.
My only additional comment is just to say that I agree wholeheartedly with Cynthia and Emily, and it was a great application. Well done.
Okay, if there are no other comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay, is everyone all set? Still finalizing scores. Dylan, are you good? Okay. All right, Veronica, you can come back to the dais. All right, next application up for review is Alchemy Theater. TJ is the primary, Emily is the secondary. I've reset the timer. So TJ, when you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
So the Alchemy Theater is a theater company here in Austin that grew out of an acting school, the Carol Hickey Acting School, in 2017. And they are seeking funding for their 2024-2025 season. It looks like they have a handful of productions slated. Excuse me, this is all 2025. Handful of productions slated from spring of 2025 through the rest of the year. I wanted to say regarding their application, specifically in the marketing and budget side of things, they scored really highly from me because I got the sense that they are clearly professionals. Their leadership is made up of people who are active in the theater and acting community. And just based on the granularity of their budget and of their marketing plans, I could tell that they would use the city money smartly. Where they did not score so highly with me is that it was not really clear to me that they were founded or are even committed necessarily to serving a specifically underserved or otherwise marginalized populations. They do seem to have an emphasis on bringing women into the spotlight, which I think is important, on bringing seniors into the spotlight, which I think is important. And they do mention BIPOC people in their key constituencies, but there's not a whole lot about this application in my reading that that affirms that. And so it was hard for me to tell if they didn't just throw that in there to try to maybe gain a little points there. I do want to say, as regards intersectionality, because I saw this in a handful of applications that were theater oriented, that when they talk about intersectionality, they talk about the characters in the plays that they are intending to produce. And I just want to point out that in my understanding of the concept, representation, while important, is not the same thing as intersectionality. And as a reviewer, I have tried to divest myself of my own aesthetic opinions and taste whatsoever, and to try not to really care too much about the content of what's being produced here. And so as regards intersectionality, I would like to see more identities, more communities, more types of people represented in your leadership, in your creative and artistic direction, in your production. You know, I'm looking for intersectionality to be a part of your organization long before the curtain ever opens for your audience. And so I would say this application also did not score so highly on intersectionality for me. Seemingly very professional and well accomplished organization, but not sure that their key constituencies are a priority for the city at this time.
I agree with pretty much everything that TJ said here. I do think it's good to see that they're planning to work with a company to diversify their board and the folks that they're bringing on to be involved with the organization. But as it stands, it does not seem to represent a lot of the city's key constituencies. And I also think some feedback I would offer is, and I did see this in a lot of applications, is people were just kind of giving the demographics of their makers and not really giving much information about how those folks represent or are involved with the key constituencies, whether they're just sharing demographic information or professional descriptions. I think it's always better to share a bit more about how that is relevant to the work that they're doing. I wasn't able to find any information about where they're serving groups that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure. So that was definitely some points off for that. There were a few examples of trying to diversify the program, but it felt to me as though that might be more geared towards trying to fit within what the grant is asking for versus what is at the core of the organizational programming and their mission statement and goals like that. I would also say in terms of accessibility, I think there was really only mention of providing an interpreter at one event, one production coming up, and a very, very small portion of the budget was dedicated to this. I think it was like $500 for the entire accessibility line item, which just seems to me like that is probably not enough for what the city is looking to accomplish.
Thank you, Emily. I'd like to invite any other panelists if you have any additional comments you'd like to add.
I thought in terms of, I agree largely with what TJ and Emily mentioned about like particularly the leadership and the key constituencies being more aligned with what the city has prioritized. But I did think their intersectionality section was a little bit stronger. And so I wanted to talk about, they mentioned specifically a work called Pipeline that is about a Black single mother and her struggles with like class. And I do think that those intersections of identities are very important. And they're actually the ones that are called out in the application of like race, class, and gender. And that play does seem to really speak to all of those. And so I did find their examples of how intersectionality is reflected in their work as pretty strong, or the works that they put on, but not necessarily in the organization itself. So that might be a way to improve.
Are there any additional other comments?
All right, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. This brings us to our first break of the day. So we have about 15 minutes. Let's all return at 11:10. And we'll begin with Design Austin. Will be our next application. So see you at 11:10. Okay, the next application up for review is Design Austin. Veronica is the primary, TJ is the secondary. I have the timer ready to go. So Veronica, when you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
Design Austin is a nonprofit organization of architects and environmental designers that have a mission to use design as a tool for community betterment. They are seeking $75,000 for a project called ATX Voices, which is a collaboration with the Texas School for the Deaf. The end game is a creation of an outdoor sculpture or a series of sculptures, which will initially be displayed on campus and later at other locations throughout the city. There is room in the application for the final product to change a little bit depending on how the course of the project goes as they're working with the School for the Deaf. Overall, I found this to be a strong application with high scores in most sections. Their history as an organization, they were founded to help desegregate the field of architecture, so they definitely had equity in mind right from the start. It was a really highly specific application with very clear data that provided a solid foundation for understanding the impact of the project that they were proposing. I was really impressed with how they had, hard numbers to substantiate their claims, detailing the number of students involved, the percentage breakdown of different demographics, and exactly how they plan to engage the TSD community. One of the standouts of the project was their kind of thoughtful and collaborative approach. They already have sessions planned to connect with the staff and faculty before engaging with students so that they can learn and understand how to address the unique needs of the student community at TSD. And I appreciated their openness to learning from the TSD staff about how to take their area of expertise, which is architecture and design, to this different population. And that willingness to maintain kind of an ongoing learning process, it, to me, signaled a high level of respect for the people that they were working with. I also liked that they were integrating this project into the curriculum. They weren't just planning on having like one sit down session with a group of students and then away they go with the plans that they already had. They really were, doing multiple sessions and trying to get a sovereign experience with the people who were involved, and their commitment to accessibility went beyond, basic ADA compliance, having interpreters not just for sign language, but also for, Spanish Sign Language interpretation, pairing with Contour Collective to ensure accessibility when they're off-site. And so it was very proactive and inclusive, and I thought it was a strong application overall.
I am in agreement with Veronica. I also thought this was a strong application, and I found it really interesting and different from almost every other application that we reviewed, in the sense that Design Austin struck me not as its own kind of cultural arts organization, but as a collective of extremely talented professionals who have access to very expensive tools. As Veronica mentioned earlier this morning, fabrication and manufacturing of art can be far and away the most expensive part of the process. And that these designers, architects, what have you, have kind of collectivized in order to serve a specific community, in this case, the blind community. And so I found myself not deviating from the rubric per se, but kind of scoring the application with that in mind, and that, this is going to be this year's project, and what they do next year might be something completely different. With that being said, I thought the value of the project that was proposed here was overall very high. High value in terms of what they're able to offer the students, the type of learning experience and artistic and life experience, but also value to the Austin community at large in terms of installing public art in our city, which is increasingly, the city that is, made out of metal and glass, and is a little bit dehumanized the more developed it becomes. So huge points from me for the emphasis on public art, huge points from me for this targeted focus on a very specific community of students that are not necessarily at risk of cultural erasure, but are certainly underrepresented, marginalized in terms of the percentage of the overall population that they make up. So I did think this was a great application, and I tried to find the most points for it wherever I could.
Thank you, TJ. Would like to invite any other reviewers, panelists, to give any additional comments.
Yes, I did find that this application addressed a different, marginalized community and with the disability. But I didn't, in looking at how to score it, I didn't really, I didn't consider that as much. So it didn't really get that high scores with me, but so thanks for bringing that up, because if this is part of the criteria that's the constituencies that Austin, the priorities that Austin has, then I will restore it. So is this one of the comments? I think one of the comments I let's see, what did I made a comment in one of my, should we be scoring the organization or the project? Because I didn't think the history of the organization was not, I didn't think it was described enough to determine its artistic goals, and because I was answering, that was in response to the history of service. So, so it's, for me, it's a question of whether to, if the issue of if the constituency of disability is part of that, those questions, the questions for the for the prioritized constituencies for Austin.
I think in terms of priority, is that sounding weird to you? Sorry. How about now? It's weird? Okay. Okay. All right. I don't know what that was. So in terms of priority, it's those at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement within Austin, and or who have been institutionally marginalized and or underfunded by the City of Austin Cultural Arts Division. So you may not know that from the application. I'm not seeing some of those things, but I think when you're scoring, you are scoring the project, but then also who they're working with. One of the things is, my question is like, is this a public event or is this just for the students? Because I do know that these funds are for public performances, events, and so like, is everybody going to be allowed to go on to the thing? So I do think that is a question, and that may be something that if they score high enough that the city can follow up on. But yes, so if I think in terms of when we think about the presentation that was made around the groups and the constituents who Austin considers to be at risk, then we would want to go back and look at that criteria for that scoring and determine. So Anne-Marie, do you have something?
I was just saying that we have under 2 minutes
Oh,
left.
I'm sorry. I forgot. I was like, that was a one. I was like, what is that? Sorry. All right. Are there other comments that any folks have?
Just to speak a little bit, just on my own perspective to Gail's inquiry, I considered the disability community not to necessarily be at risk of cultural erasure, but to be historically marginalized. So they are a community that has not always been served by these funds, although they're not necessarily a community that is actively getting priced out and pushed out of Austin. So my interpretation was that they did fall under that particular umbrella in the overall key constituencies.
Thank you for that information or your perspective.
Okay, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. And while you're finalizing, if you're done, you can go ahead and pull up Dorf. That'll be the next application we'll be reviewing. Veronica has a conflict, so she'll be turning off her mic and her camera. Gail is the primary for Dorf and Dylan is the secondary. And I have the timer all set, and if everyone's ready to roll, Gail, whenever you begin speaking, I will start the timer. Gail, you're muted.
Okay. All right, so Dorf is an artist-run, nonprofit experimental space producing culturally and socially responsive art programming, providing opportunities for expression and innovation. It's art for social change. This programming explores challenging socio-political subject matter through critical consciousness frameworks and advocates for key constituents through art, dialogue, and partnerships. The key constituencies are artists, cultural workers, and members of Austin's creative class at the intersection of BIPOC, Latino, Middle Eastern, Asian, and Pacific Islander and LGBTQIA plus and disability communities. So their history is that they opened in 2018 in response to the space crisis facing Austin artists after being priced out of their long-term studio. So they created space in their garage, converted their space into their garage into a studio and gallery. In 2024, they formed an inaugural advisory council, which includes members of the constituencies that they want to serve. I found this to be a strong application, and in terms of how they are for working on equity, it's on track to become wage working artist for a greater economy certified, and has followed this standard compensation guidelines for artists paying an equitable wage. Partnerships. All right, so it's a majority female-led organization, and currently operates with the help of an advisory board. Okay, one moment. So their proposed activity is an open house, marks the grand opening exhibit at Dorf's new location because they are moving into a leased space, and features artists with themes of openness, inclusivity, growth, healing, and care. It has invited 10 to take on curatorial roles. The desired outcome for this is collaborative and community curated show, which will celebrate the past and introduce the organization to a larger audience. It provides a platform for key constituencies to take on creative leadership roles through the curatorial process. And activity 2 is a cultural heritage and way of life of the Estoic Gana people in Garcia Pasture, a sacred tribal site located near what is now Brownsville, and is rapidly vanishing due to climate change, natural resource extraction, and desecration of ancestral lands. So it'll be an exhibit that photographs the indigenous people, designed to provide a high-profile exhibit space to premiere the project and support the artists Tahila Moss in collaborating with indigenous communities in Texas. So I did, like I said, I found this to be compelling and strong application.
And whenever you're ready, if you have additional comments you'd like to add.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with the previous panelist. I would say this application's almost totally in alignment with grant guidelines. I would say that the application could be stronger by explicitly stating the relationship of leadership with key constituencies at immediate risk of displacement or cultural erasure in Austin. Um, and I feel like, citing specific examples in every section would have made it a stronger application, but it's already very strong. And also I don't necessarily agree with this, but according to grant guidelines, um, constituencies that are called like women or artists are not considered constituencies that are at immediate risk of displacement or cultural erasure in Austin. So I would just like to put that out there so that whoever is watching this can understand that with their application process, um, and maybe research it a little bit more so that it can be explicitly expressed in the application for the future.
Dylan, are you finished? Okay, thank you. Would like to invite any other panelists to offer up any comments.
Yeah, I think just piggybacking on Dylan's point here, anybody who is an artist or who has worked in the arts in Austin can attest to the socioeconomic erasure that we face as artists. And so I tried to take that into consideration when they were describing their key constituencies and grant them a little bit of wiggle room there. I will say that I scored this application very highly in the accessibility section, and I loved seeing the specific organizations and contractors that they were going to use in order to increase their accessibility. And to me, this hits the mark perfectly in terms of making deep and meaningful accommodations for differently abled people. And not very many applications in my review here were able to rise to the level of presenting such a cohesive accessibility plan. So my personal opinion is that I really liked that.
One more thing about the leadership. So they mentioned the volunteer advisory board, and I just happen to know who some of those artists are and know that they are representatives of the BIPOC and queer community. So maybe if they had just kind of called that out, I think that would have helped make that section a little bit stronger.
Yeah, it's good to hear that because I try to do extra research if that kind of information is not present, but I can't always find it. So
We have a little under 2 minutes left. Any other additional comments? No. All right, you may finalize your scores. Okay, if everyone finalize their scores, feeling good? Okay. Veronica, you can come back to the dais. Thank you. And we'll move on to our next application. Reclaimed. Dylan is the primary, Gail is the secondary. Dylan, the timer is all set. So whenever you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
Anne Marie, oh, I was gonna say we lost Priscilla, but it looks like she's coming back.
Oh, yes.
so are we ready?
I
Sorry
think
about
so.
that. The power went and I
Oh,
went
no.
away. So sorry about that, y'all.
All right, Dylan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Reclaimed. I found this to be a very moving and really amazing project. However, it has many aspects that are in line with grant guidelines, but some that haven't been expressed, at least in the grant application. So let's just to go over what the project is. It is the programs are aimed to provide a supportive, inclusive environment where individuals in recovery can engage in therapeutic, creative activities, volunteer and community service, and build skills that build self-worth and could lead to a new vocational pursuit for these folks. They're they state that Reclaimed it has a diverse participant base that encompasses a range of demographics beyond those in the recovery community, including they have percentages: 15% BIPOC, 40% Latinx or Latine, 40% is LGBTQ plus, 10% is transgender. 30% of participants face housing instability. Many are engaged in legal rehab. So I would say that they're really doing good work with a focus on civic responsibility. Uh, and all I can say regarding the application is that I feel like I'm trying to not grade on grantsmanship, but if those who are applying can thoroughly research the public documents associated with the grants, then that makes my job easier, which is to see how it aligns with the concepts of equity and of serving constituencies that are at immediate risk of displacement or cultural erasure in Austin. And the more that the grant can application can show how those are in alignment, then I can give it a bigger score. So I would suggest like that it's important to consider concepts of equity and cite specific key constituencies that are in alignment with grant priorities. And also just make sure you don't leave anything blank on the application. Answering the questions thoroughly, that gives an opportunity to express like the good work that is being done. Uh, and so like that's pretty important. And so it leaves a lot of blank spaces where I don't know really what's going on. And I do try to do some independent research apart from the materials that are supplied with the application. But some things I just can't figure it out, right? So then I don't know if it's really in alignment, and so I have to assume that it isn't. So make sure everyone fill out your application completely, and answer the questions very thoroughly, every aspect of every question, citing the specific constituencies in each section where that you're serving with your project. And I feel like it's a really great project personally. It doesn't necessarily serve like the tourist constituency, which is like part of what our whole grant process is, is funded with the hot funds, hotel occupancy tax. So that's one of the requirements of the application. However, I feel like it's doing great work, and so I tried to give it best scores I could in each section, considering that there were some areas that I couldn't figure out what was going on. So let's see. As far as budget could have been more thoroughly expressed, I would say points were definitely awarded for payments to artists and project administrators. Budget was reflective of that project and the application. I think more points could have been scored by filling out like all the fields, having a consideration that if there's a field there for the budget, then there's an expectation that some of the funds should be allocated to that. As far as marketing, having some way to express like the benefits of the project to tourists would have been really great. And it seems very challenging because like this project is more of a civic responsibility project, like helping people have a pathway to get back on their feet who are institutionally ostracized from society. And so having a way to express that, it seems challenging, but to think about it, it's like very important for the grant priority. So you got to think about it. Let's see what else. As far as language accessibility, points are awarded for stating some access to programs for Spanish speakers. More points would have been awarded for a plan to hire professional translators to help with events into any non-English language or to American Sign Language. So that's related to the budget thing, right? So like plan to have someone who is professional, who knows what they're doing, who's going to be part of the project. As far as accessibility, there could have been a lot more points there. So like coming up with a plan for activities to include deep and impactful adaptations to your services, like your workshops and things for individuals with disabilities, or who are, whether it's hearing impaired, mobility impaired, or vision impaired. Any kind of plan would have been a stronger application. So the way I think about it is like if I am mobility impaired or hearing impaired or vision impaired, like how would I feel going into this workshop, right, to learn new skills? If I show up and there's like no way for me to interact or no assistance for me to interact, right? So having any kind of plan would have made it a stronger application. So those are my main points. I feel like the activities were described very well, but more, like I said, like in each section, describe how this you would have had a stronger application if you cited specific constituencies at risk of immediate displacement or cultural erasure in Austin, and stating how you're accountable to these communities, explicitly stating how equity is a core part of the proposed activities, which I feel like it is, but it wasn't expressed in that section. So I feel like the consideration of equity was not it could have been stronger. Let's just say that. But I think it's an amazing project, and I would hope that it carries on and helps people who are like like I said, institutionally ostracized from society in various ways. That's it.
And I agree with most of what Dylan was saying. I just think it was not, I think that the priority constituencies are not intentional. There's an outreach to the recovery community, and by default, it has people in it that meet the criteria, but it's not really done on purpose for the organization. And does it have to? But so that's the thing when people are trying to, when groups are trying to applying for funding and look at these criteria, then they know that they have some, but their outreach is not specifically to those communities. It kind of happens by default, and I think that that's one of the things that is not, it's not clear, like Dylan was saying, it's not clear in the application how they actually outreach to these specific communities, and they may not, so I think they're doing great work. I love their work, but it just may not fit for this particular grant.
We have a little less than 1 minute. Are there any other comments that would need Veronica?
I just had one really specific thing I wanted to speak to, which is in the description of the board or the leadership. They had a lot of letters after everyone's name without an explanation of what those are. So specifically for this application and applications in general, don't assume that the reviewers know these acronyms. I would have really appreciated them being spelled out, especially when there's multiple ones. It would help me understand better the qualifications of people and how they interact with community. And just maybe a brief suggestion to have like a non-voting board member who represents some of the people who are actually in the programs and not just the people who are administering them, because it did seem like it was a lot of we're trying to help you, but we're not you.
I just have a quick question. It was my understanding that addiction is a disability, and so that their work is all focused on the disability community, which is a key constituency that the city has prioritized. So just didn't know if that was right.
That's time. Priscilla, did you want to add a thought?
Yeah, I don't think disability falls under one of the sorry, the brain just went under one of the labels of where folks who are considered with disabilities. I think there might be other, under the technical term of that that label. There are other things that folks might have that go along with that, but just having an addiction alone does not allow folks to fall into the disability category.
Okay, and I just want to throw out two or one clarifying things in terms of tourism. The applicant should be providing information on how their event is going to be marketed to tourists. That's within the scoring rubric. However, it is not necessarily a requirement that the activity proposed be something that is considered a tourist draw. It could be very much a community-oriented, community-centered type of project. But as long as they are, if they were to be awarded funds, the applicants would need to show how that they are marketing that event to the general public, including tourists, because the funds come from the hotel occupancy tax.
And can I just add the one thing around the grantsmanship to support Dylan? Dylan spoke to not when Dylan was speaking of not grading on grantsmanship, what the bigger picture of that around grantsmanship is around equity and access to these funds. The grantsmanship that we're asking panelists to follow is if the information is there, and it could be in different forms, right? It could be bullet, it could be narrative, it could be some misspellings, it could be a little, that's what we're asking folks not to. So Dylan was saying it's not there more than it's about the grantsmanship. So I just wanted to support that, that's the aspect, is that you definitely weren't scoring on grantsmanship. It's that the information is not there. And we're really asking folks to be really mindful that folks can present information in various ways, but if it's missing, it's missing, so.
All right, thank you, Priscilla, and thank you for panelists. Let's go ahead and move on to the next application. Has everyone finalized their scores for Reclaimed? Great. All right. Let me see where we are. Okay, ScriptWorks 2024 to 25. Cynthia is the primary. Veronica is the secondary. Let's see. Timer is set. So Cynthia, whenever you're ready to begin, I will start the timer.
So ScriptWorks supports playwrights to develop and produce their work with a strong focus on BIPOC creators. They're requesting $80,000 to support a production called Out of Ink, which creates several plays over a weekend with the involvement of the local Austin community and a dramatis persona a workshop series, which provides their members with professional development support. I really liked that. I think professional development is something that a lot of artists need particular support on because it can be really hard to eke out a living doing creative work. So I think any organization that has a strong focus on that is desperately needed in the community. What I liked about their application was a strong focus on their key constituents of BIPOC community residents and artists through their programming, through their leadership, through their organizational vision overall. That thread was running throughout the application. And so I gave them pretty high scores in those areas. In terms of accessibility and language access, it wasn't nearly as strong. There were some kind of gestures toward these things as like, oh, we could try that, or it's interesting, but not really a clear plan on how to implement it or who would be doing that or who's responsible for that work. So I think that is an area where they could improve the application to make it stronger overall. But I did feel that I did give them generally a high score and felt that they understood the requirements of the grant and communicated those strategies clearly.
I agree with a lot of what Cynthia said. This was overall a strong application with a little bit of wonkiness in the accessibility section that could have definitely been just more specific, clearly outlined, a clear plan. One thing that really struck me that was different than a lot of the other applications that I read was that prior to starting new programs, they took the step of investigating whether they had done any harm or discrimination in the past. And I think that this introspective work, followed by potential reparative actions, is really meaningful and a really responsible approach, and that more organizations could benefit from taking this sort of self-assessment, perhaps like guided by an outside professional before starting a new initiative, because a lot of initiatives sometimes can perpetuate harm, pardon me, under the guise of positive change if you're not sort of evaluating how you've done things in the past and if they have been effective or not. So that was just one thing that was really different about this application that I thought more people should maybe take that sort of approach.
Thank you. Would like to invite any other panelists to add any additional comments?
I would just, I would recommend that their website kind of align with like this, if the priority are these populations, constituencies, then it seems like their website should, I didn't see it on their website that this was a that this was particularly a priority in any place. Now, I may have missed it, but how would anybody know that this was that there was that type of organization that was inclusive and open to this participation? I didn't get it, but it may have been there. I just didn't see it.
Any other comments?
Yeah, there was one aspect of the application that I found somewhat confusing under the cultural leadership response. I was unable to find supporting evidence showing the leadership roles were held by folks that are of BIPOC constituencies. But it's stated in there that that they represent communities of color. So I would say, like, if leadership roles are held by BIPOC folks, it was not explicitly stated. I couldn't find it in my research, like looking at their website and stuff. So more points could have been awarded. The application would have been stronger if there were BIPOC members of the leadership. And because these folks are considered to be constituencies at immediate risk of displacement and cultural erasure in Austin. And so that was just like kind of, it stood out to me as like a confusing thing. So like to explicitly state like which members of the leadership are of these constituencies, I think it's might be somewhat misleading to say that people represent communities of color when they aren't actually like part of those constituencies.
Dylan, any other comments?
One question, is that something that is, when they turn in their, do they give a copy of their board of directors there, and on that, are there demographics?
So there are, it sounds very auto here. Is it awesome? Okay, is it better now? Oh, goodness, okay. So yes, the demographics are in the application piece, but again, that question, right before they answer it, it states that this will not be shared with the reviewers. So that's where I spoke to earlier around folks can figure out how to share that information, or they should share it, if particularly if they're going to speak to that. I agree, right, around that. So I think it allows folks, some folks don't want to disclose something because it asks about gender identity, it asks things about sexual orientation. And so in order to, you know, if you have a small board, you might want to not state some of that publicly. However, I think there are ways in which you can speak to that. Like I think what you're saying, Gail and Dylan, around, you know, how do we know, like particularly when the application is asking about leadership and do you represent and where are you from, that there are ways to include that information in here. So yeah. Any additional things that folks?
Okay, please finalize your scores. All right, if everyone's ready to go. Next up is Austin Unconducted. Emily is the primary. Cynthia is the secondary. Let's see, let me reset the timer. That'll let me, come on, there we go. Emily, whenever you're ready, and you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
Okay, Austin Unconducted was founded in 2022 with the mission of building community and making traditional orchestra music more relevant and inclusive. They are a bit different from a traditional orchestra in that they function more as a cooperative. Instead of having a conductor, the members collaborate internally and with local curators to produce unique concert performances. I thought this was a really good application. They did a great job answering all of the questions in pretty great detail. They focus on creating a welcoming space for members of all ages, interests, and backgrounds, and they do prioritize bringing in folks that have historically been left out of classical music spaces, including BIPOC and queer folks. And I really also liked the educational aspect of this, where they partner with Title I schools and bring music to students who might have limited access to live music programming otherwise. And they work exclusively with Austin-based musicians and curators and focus on featuring composers who come from backgrounds that are underrepresented in classical music, and those folks do also align with the city's constituencies of folks who are at risk of cultural erasure. They mentioned specifically that 100% of their curators and 82% of the works that they have performed have been by composers from these underrepresented groups. As a co-op, they are led by 4 co-founders of varying demographics and include their constituents in decision-making through surveys, votes, and town hall meetings. So I think kind of the open collaboration with community and cooperative style of the organization just speaks to their inclusion and intersectionality goals. Their plan for this grant is to continue their concert programming as well as expanding on their educational initiatives with those Title I schools. It sounds like they have plans to engage Spanish speakers in online and print marketing campaigns, as well as in the programming that they're planning to book in this upcoming season. If I could give any feedback, I would say that in the budget, it doesn't allocate any money towards marketing, but they do mention that they've sold out all of their performance previously, and so maybe this funding is better distributed for them elsewhere. I do think their admin fees kind of cover marketing roles. Similarly with accessibility, that doesn't seem to be an additional cost that they would be incurring with this grant funding, but it sounds like they have some staff members that handle this, which would be covered with the administration fees. Another marketing note I have is that the only tourism outreach they mention is the free online calendar listings with the city. And so maybe there are some more creative ways if they did want to allocate some marketing money towards reaching tourists and folks that aren't based in Austin. That might be one thing to consider.
Yeah, I largely agree with what Emily mentioned, particularly about how this organization really centers the voices and the works of the BIPOC community. And they've also developed programming to serve them, and their leadership is reflective of that as well. So I scored them highly there. Just one other thing I wanted to call out as a place to improve would be in accessibility. They mentioned making I think they said like neurodivergent audiences feel welcome there, which I thought was great. But there wasn't really any kind of intentionality or any trained professional services or anything else. It was just like you can kind of get up and move around if you need to. There wasn't really any structure there. So I think that might be a place to just focus a little bit more. They did talk about accessibility in terms of affordability, which I think, while important, isn't necessarily what the question is asking about. So just to clarify there, that accessibility means making the space or the work accessible to people with disabilities.
Like to invite other folks, and accessibility can include that. But if when we're talking about, yeah, so I definitely I just wanted to say you can include that because the folks can't attend if they can't come, they can't afford it. But yes, any other folks that on the panel that would like to add?
I thought it was a great application. It seems like a very, very cool organization and a very small d democratic organization, and I really respected that.
Anyone else?
All right, go ahead and finalize your scores. All right, is everyone wrapped up with their scores? Great. Let's go ahead and go on to the next application. Girls Rock Austin. TJ is the primary, Emily is the secondary. Let me reset my timer here. All right, TJ, whenever you're ready, you may begin and I'll start the timer.
So Girls Rock Austin is primarily a summer camp for girls who are also youths to learn how to play instruments, write songs, participate in band dynamics, and they are seeking funding for their next year's summer camp, a week in June in 2025, as well as some money that they would set aside for band coaching on a quarterly basis throughout the rest of 2024 and 2025. I did take note that they won the Elevate grant last year. And so I tried to keep that in mind as I was scoring their application. And I tried to keep it especially salient because I kept coming up short on some of the points in the categories. And so I do have some recommendations of how this could be a stronger application. But I guess it starts with, the key constituencies here are youths who are girls, which is not particularly oriented toward a marginalized community or an underserved community, or at least it's hard for me as a childless adult to think of youths as being underserved. I don't know if that's just me, but it was also hard for me to kind of understand their history of service because I believe this organization started in Portland, Oregon in 2007. And it's not clear to me if Girls Rock Austin is a chapter of this organization that is on a national level, or if they were inspired by this organization and began doing that in Austin. So it was difficult for me to nail down the history of service as well. All that being said, I tried to be very generous with the points here. I do have the bias that I am a professional musician and I'm endeared to music projects and I'm endeared to educational projects because that's what I do in my day job is educate. Nevertheless, some other areas for improvement under the cultural leadership category. The vice president of this organization gave us a very touching story of self-improvement and of overcoming some medical issues, but unfortunately, she did not give me any indication of who else is leading this organization, what backgrounds they represent, what communities they represent. I could not find really anything about who are the people and what is their lived experience for participating in this summer camp, other than I have to imagine that all of them are working musicians or at least educated musicians. So you could have gotten a lot more points in the cultural leadership category if there was just a little more specificity about your leadership. And it doesn't have to be like a life story for every person, just who are they? Where do they come from? Who do they represent with their own experience? The other thing that I had trouble scoring on was the marketing category. They start their marketing description by saying that this past year they've put more focus on marketing than ever before. But then the following description to my reading does not really indicate a broad or even targeted marketing effort. So I guess they have a posting schedule for social media, Facebook, TikTok, Discord, etc. And some of their members have been interviewed on a radio station about a different activity that is kind of tangentially adjacent to Girls Rock Austin. So the advice that I would give you if you're watching Girls Rock Austin is just to keep in mind that, as a summer camp, you are offering a service to a constituency that resides in Austin, and you need to market to that constituency. And as I mentioned to another application earlier today, we have print weeklies, we have radio, we have public access television, we have tons of nonprofits and for-profits in Austin that will accept some of this money in exchange for promoting your organization. And so I would have liked to see a more decisive plan on just how you would do that. And I think that about sums it up for me.
Yeah, I think I'll just build off of a lot of what TJ was saying. I do think women are considered a marginalized group, although not necessarily one that is at risk of immediate cultural erasure. I also know just from experience and involvement in the community that Girls Rock Austin does serve a lot of non-binary and queer and neurodivergent youth. All of that could have been better laid out in the application answers as well. For the cultural leadership, yeah, we really only got a story about one member. I would love to learn more about the folks who are working directly with the youth and kind of how they can relate to these folks and kind of what their backgrounds are. Also, feedback on the marketing. We really only found out how they were engaging with their current constituents, not how they're reaching out to new folks or drawing new people into the organization. And to kind of elaborate on that, without the marketing plan to back it up, $10,000 in the budget to be allocated towards marketing based mostly in social media boosting, to me doesn't really seem to be the best use of funds. I would like to see more of that invested back into the community press and media relations, such that TJ had mentioned. And it didn't seem to have any money allocated toward accessibility, especially when you are working with these neurodivergent youth and folks that might, do well to have some support in that area. It would be nice to see some budget put towards those services.
Thank you, Emily. Any other panelists have any additional comments you'd like to make?
Okay, seeing no additional comments, let's go ahead and finalize scores. This is the last application of our morning session, so we'll move into the lunch break. We're running a little bit over time, but I think that's fine. So let's plan on being back at 12, not 12, at 1:06 is when we'll start back up again. And we'll start with Jarrett Productions will be the first application we will be reviewing. So we will see you at 1:06. And well, good afternoon. This is the afternoon session of Elevate Review Panel Organizations Panel 2. Today is September 9th, 2024. My name is Anne-Marie McCaskill Davis. I'm the Cultural Funding Specialist Senior at the City of Austin's Cultural Arts Division. Our tech pilot is Maya Williams-Britton, who's also a Cultural Funding Specialist with the City of Austin. And then we also have our facilitator, Priscilla Hale, here with us today. Prior to this panel review day, the panelists have reviewed and given preliminary scores and comments to all the applications we're discussing today. They do have the ability to make score changes and updates to their comments as we discuss applications. We will provide 10 minutes per application maximum, and I'll be timing that. If we run into any technical difficulties, we'll pause the recording and we'll pause the timer. And then once that's resolved, we'll start everything back up again. We've asked panelists not to repeat their comments if they already have, if another panelist has already said something that they noted in their comments. Additionally, panelists are not scoring on consensus, so they may have divergent opinions. We've asked them not to announce a numeric score. They are also going to just provide overall application comments. Their comments should align with the review criteria that is outlined in the scoring rubric, which has been posted on the Elevate website since the program launched a couple of months ago. They should not be basing their scores on information that is not listed in the rubric, things like financial need or geographic service area, for example. Those are not within the scoring rubric. We've also asked the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship. They may include firsthand experience. So if they've attended an event, they can discuss that experience, and they can also review the applicant website, although that is not a requirement. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will recuse themselves by turning off their mic and turning off their cameras. Then we'll invite them back to the dais once all panelists have finalized their scores for that application. We will begin with Jarrett Productions. We have assigned primary and secondary reviewers to each application. This does not mean that those are the only two applicants reviewing the application or who have scored the application. It's just a mechanism for us to ensure that that there is someone who can speak and introduce an application to the rest of the panelists. And then the secondary is there to also provide additional comments. All right. Let's see. We have lost Gail. Oh, there she is. Welcome back. Okay, so without further ado, let's go to Jarrett Productions. Veronica is the primary, TJ is the secondary. I have the timer set and ready to go. So Veronica, when you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
Jarrett Productions is seeking $80,000 to support their 2024-2025 theatrical season. It's 4 different productions at the Trinity State Playhouse. They employ a range of creatives both on and off stage. Overall, this application for me scored sort of in the medium range. The proposed season seemed very vibrant. The work samples clearly demonstrated a high level of professionalism, and it was evident that the people who are involved with the organization have significant experience within theater, which speaks to the quality of what they produce. I appreciated that 75% of their productions have engaged members of the LGBTQIA+ community, either on stage or behind the scenes, and this commitment to inclusion is reflected in the score. However, when evaluating the overall alignment with the funding goals of the Elevate grant, I did find that there was some room for growth in terms of fully integrating priority key constituencies into both programming and decision-making. One area I would encourage them to explore further is their plan to diversify the board and also to continue to grow the New Voices program. Both of those are great steps towards significant inclusion, and I see potential there. Also, I think a more targeted outreach in the marketing strategies could help them better engage with a variety of constituencies and align more closely with Elevate's goals. I did note that their current focus is on plays with senior characters, and that's valuable within the broader context of theater, particularly ensuring that there are opportunities for people as they age. However, age is not a focus for this particular funding program, and that aspect of their application, while commendable, doesn't kind of align with what Elevate's doing. I would encourage them to look for other funding opportunities, because there certainly are grants makers out there who support senior productions. Don't use this as your only way to support your programming. There's other people who do have those key constituencies in mind. For future applications, I feel like more recent and just kind of more specific data would help to clarify how their current projects are engaging with the communities that Elevate focuses on. I appreciate their acknowledgement that they're working to expand representation, and the New Voices program is a promising step. As I said earlier, overall, they were kind of in the medium range, very professional, but still some room for growth. And I encourage them to continue the good work and just to continue to kind of align their efforts with the City of Austin's priority goals.
Yeah, in addition to what Veronica said, I also want to emphasize that I was impressed by their opening act initiative, which shows a little bit of foresight and forethought about kind of injecting some diversity into their program material, specifically as regards serving underserved communities. Overall, I ended up with a kind of medium-high score for this. One of the things that I would have liked to see improved in the accessibility section, and this by no means is limited to just Jarrett Productions in terms of applicants here, but I tend to think of these grants as well, it's free money in a sense, right? And if you're an organization that is already solvent and you're already in the process of producing and creating for the community, I would have liked to see more creativity with regard to how you could use an additional injection of $80,000 to expand what you already do. So just in terms of accessibility, I think they had committed here to having one show per season where they would hire a professional ASL interpreter. Why not hire an ASL interpreter for every show? I mean, that to me would reflect, for our scoring rubric, deep and meaningful or impactful accommodations for accessibility with the use specifically of city money, because that is what we're talking about here, is city money. So kind of aligned with what Veronica is saying here, well-rounded application, vibrant and good organization that seems to be doing good work in the community, with just a little bit of room for improvement with regard to how they would use public funds to really elevate, no pun intended, the accessibility and quality of their productions.
Thank you, TJ. I'd like to invite other panelists to add any additional comments.
I would just like to add, while it does seem to be that their main focus is the older community, that is not exclusive of people of color or people with disabilities or the queer community or any other marginalized group. So I think the application could drastically be improved if it talked about that and talked about how they might be including. Just because you're older doesn't mean you don't have any of the other intersectional identities. So I think I also kind of gave it a middle score because it didn't reflect any of that, but that might just be something to think about in the future. Like, your community, while older, is also still many other things.
Well, I noted on their website and their Instagram posts that I could see some diversity of artists, including and represented in this project, including BIPOC folks. So I think that when they're describing their key constituencies, they could have described and explicitly included the people that clearly are part of their productions. Instead of saying diverse artists and audiences, specifically citing the constituencies at risk of immediate erasure or cultural erasure in Austin. that are involved with what they're doing.
Yes, this is a point where specificity strengthens the process and the application. Anybody else?
All right, seeing no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay, everyone ready to move on to the next application? Great. All right, up next is Beertoven. Gail is the primary, Veronica is the secondary. Gail, I have the timer set for 10 minutes, so whenever you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
So Beethoven creates experiences with classical music that enrich the community through down-to-earth means. Their programs break down social, in their description, they say their programs break down social, economic, and formal barriers to accessing classical music, creating an environment that is welcoming to the most diverse portion of our community possible. It's 3 primary constituencies: our artists, the audience, and staff and administrators. They say that race, ethnicity, and gender have historically been key that's okay. In order to confront the exclusionary nature of classical music, or the exclusionary factors in classical music, they engage people of color and women who are composers, performers, and partners in their program, emphasizing local artists and their work in the programs. They create programming that reflects and supports the local community and creates the best representation of our city. So with this proposal, I scored it in the middle category, and I felt like from their description that their mission is rooted in serving communities. And I guess the part of it is that, you know, how do we think of this? How do people describe this? What are the ingredients that show that the work is rooted in these constituencies? And so from this, I mean, I looked at the needs of their constituencies. They began in 2014. In 2018, they had and this is what they put in their proposal. 2018, 2020, and 2023, they had kind of diverse programming by people of color. And so they also, during the pandemic, they provided various levels of support to artists from minority communities, including over $2,500 in emergency funding. So in their cultural leadership, who holds their decision, who are the decision makers in their organization? It's well, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of how to word things. So what I found is that this organization is, you know, somewhere in the middle of providing. They have these descriptions that they for their programming. However, it seems a little not contrived, but seems that they're listing the things that are that and not like their whole programming. So it seems like these are little pieces of their whole programming. And so I think that when we look at these criteria, that what are the degrees of what makes a proposal the kind of ideal? What would be the ideal proposal here? And so that's a little hard to judge with some organizations that are really rooted in there with their leadership, with their programming, that are really rooted in these communities, and others that are pieces, small pieces of their organizations that meet this criteria. So I think that their proposed activities are good. Just the parts about the inclusion and intersectionality, I'm a little what I described, the description of the criteria does not offer an opportunity to review sufficiently. This is one of my comments about it. It's not clear of how constituencies are included in determining the content of their season. So those things were not clear to me. And so I scored it accordingly. But I did think they had accessibility. I thought that their language accessibility was good. Those parts of the application were good. The marketing was good. So anyway, that's it.
I appreciate Gail's comments. I feel like we might diverge just a little bit. This was like a medium high score for me, but it's definitely a personal interpretation thing. I thought that overall they had, it was a very clear application, especially they had a specific demographic breakdown of the board, which is helpful. It really helped me to line things up with the rubric. They sort of explicitly communicated which key constituencies they were doing grant programs with and who they were like welcoming into decision making at different levels, which wasn't, it wasn't a perfect score, but I was maybe medium high in it. I also thought that the mix of highlighting under-recognized composers from history while also engaging with living composers was a nice balance between kind of historical correction and supporting contemporary voices, both of which are necessary, right, to improve like our thought of who makes things and whose contributions are valuable. I liked the specificity of the marketing plan, which had very clear targeted outreach to various communities, which was not present in a lot of the applications that we saw. So I thought that, it was medium high. I thought they were doing good work. There was room for growth, as many applicants have.
Thank you. I'd like to invite other panelists to contribute. Any comments you may have?
I found that this application was very strong. I think it's almost total alignment with grant guidelines. The one blind spot that I found was accessibility. Um, and to recommend to those who are applying, just to reiterate from my earlier comments, I think it's applicable here. Imagine what life would be like if you had any of the challenges that the disability community faces in their daily life, and plan for how you would like to be accommodated with those. What would make you feel welcome?
Any other comments?
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. All right, if everyone is all set. Okay, we'll move on to the next application. It's Arcos. The primary is Dylan, the secondary is Gail. Let's see, let me reset the timer here. Okay, Dylan, whenever you're ready to begin, I will start the timer.
Arcos, an overview of the project from their application. Their mission is to hybridize live dancing bodies with ancient and emergent technologies in ways that deepen understanding of interdependence of our own bodies and others, to manifest strategies from collective flourishing. Envisions a community with equitable and vibrant microcosm of democracy through an active embrace of the kind of difference rehearsed by artists and audiences in the collaborative, active, empathic imagination. I feel like this is a very strong application. The key constituencies of Arcos independent dance artists, especially those with intersectional identities, and they named a number and gave supporting evidence of a number of dance artists with intersectional identities such as African, Latina, Arab, Asian, Native American, whose gender and or sexual orientation is queer, whose mental or physical qualities require accommodations not fully afforded or accepted in today's society. And I feel like this project is indeed serving those communities, those key constituencies, by offering dance artist micro grants. That gives one example of what they did in 2015. It's a bit dated, but the idea is to like center equity in the discussion and in the action of funding artists. So they invite review panelists with underrepresented identities in dance, which is in alignment with the City of Austin's priority constituencies: Asian, Black, Latina, Native American, multiracial, queer, and immigrants. So I feel like their project has shown evidence of serving those key constituencies very strongly. Now, let's see. Yeah, they did a great job in many of the sections. And just overall, I believe this is an outstanding application. It's in alignment with almost all of the grant guidelines and priorities. Let me see, there is one area. Okay, marketing response. They had a very well-developed marketing strategy, but it could have been a stronger application with efforts to reach tourists. And perhaps there is some overlap with their strategies, but since that aspect wasn't specifically mentioned, then I wasn't able to give them full points on that. And then everything else, very much in alignment with the priorities of the grant. Let's see, cultural leadership. It is clear that some of the applicants administrative and creative leadership have a deeply rooted cultural understanding and or lived experience with their listed key constituency groups, but more points would have been awarded if there was more intersectionality expressed there. So that's all I got.
And I agree with most of what Dylan said. I want to make note that they show one fundamental leadership decision is to employ more horizontal decision-making processes by contracting key constituents to serve in decision-making roles. So that is interesting about how they're gonna how they look to implement that, because that's not an easy thing, especially when founders are involved in the organization still. So that's commendable. That's all. That's all I've got.
Thank you. I'd like to invite other panelists.
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. Everybody all set? Mm, okay. Great. Up next is the Barron's Men. Cynthia is the primary, Dylan is the secondary. Let me reset the timer. All right, Cynthia, whenever you're ready, I will start the timer when you begin speaking.
So the Barron's Men are a theater company that focuses on plays from ancient Greece through 1650, and it's held in a scale replica of Shakespeare's Globe Theater, which there are only a handful in the world, so that's quite special. And they're requesting to stage 4 productions, 2 Shakespeare and 2 original works, in 2024 and 2025. What I liked about their application was the resident artist program that focused on BIPOC and neurodiverse communities and felt like the place where they were strongest in terms of the priority constituencies that the city has deemed. I think the other strong part of their application was their marketing plan. That seemed very comprehensive to me and covered all of the bases that the application is looking for. So those are where I had the highest scores. In terms of like language and accessibility, I felt that those were places where they had room for improvement. Particularly, they mention having opportunities for neurodiverse children, but they don't really talk about what that means or what that looks like or who's implementing it, how it works, anything like that. So I thought that might be a place for them to just kind of get a little bit more specific in their application. Also, their their leadership didn't seem to have, like, some of it felt like there might be a few people that fit the marginalized communities, but it wasn't very clear to me that it was a majority or how their voices were being specifically amplified amongst leadership. So I gave them a little bit lower scores there. But overall, they were kind of medium because I saw there were a few different opportunities for them to improve their services in order to meet those city community needs of the groups that are at risk of cultural erasure.
I agree with a lot of Cynthia's approach and her opinion on the grant. A few areas where I disagree is well, language accessibility. I believe they do have their proposed activities include specialized adaptations or services for non-English speaking communities. It includes participation of trained professionals. Maybe I think this is a case where they say they would like to expand their programming, you know, and so but don't currently have the funding. So I guess I'm inferring there that they're going to have that if they get the funding, but maybe Cynthia's right about that. They're not really solid on it. Um, they do mention specifically they plan to translate all programs and front of house signage into Spanish. So that's good in serving non-English speaking communities in a way. Let's see, as far as everything else, I feel like their marketing plan was super solid, very well developed, and hit all the marks that the grant guidelines are looking for. Now, as far as budget, there was some aspect which they did not quite get together, which is that uh, the grant guidelines state that you have to have some kind of production expenses which are paid for by the grant funds, and they left a blank line on production expenses. So I think it's a overall much in alignment with grant guidelines. I think further and explicit inclusion of key constituencies at immediate risk of displacement or cultural erasure would be more in alignment with grant guidelines.
I'm gonna give one point of clarity in terms of the budget. In the instructions, it says that there should be production related expenses. It's not necessarily only referring to the production fees line item. It could be anywhere else, including equipment rental or supplies, materials, or venue office rental. Those can all be counted towards the production expenses component of the budget.
And also in this budget, they do put the description to state that the cost for those would come out of other funds. So
one of the things that stood out to me as a reviewer, as we're talking about the budget here, is that you know, these folks are seeking $80,000 for this production, and over 5/8 of that money, $53,000, is slated just to go to venue rental. And that raised a little bit of a red flag to me because I can't evaluate the people who run this Elizabethan theater on the west side of Austin. I can only evaluate what the Baron's men represent. But just in my reading of the application, to funnel the majority of funds to a single entity, even in the service of producing these plays, to me does not really reflect the kind of cultural equity and serving of underserved communities that these grants are geared towards. So this application actually scored quite low for me.
TJ, can you I just want to make sure that I'm understanding, because you were saying a big portion, 50-something thousand, is going to it's actually to space rental. So it looks like it's for
to rent the curtain, which I think is the name of this Elizabethan theater, if I'm not incorrect.
So there's a lot of breakdown in here. So it looks like it's going, is it for, it looks like it's for events. And so if it is then for events, then it would be for space rental for each one of those activities, and not just for like office rent. And so I just want to,
my point stands that, you know, a couple $1,000s is going to rehearsal space rentals, but by my calculator, $49,000 is just going to the curtain, which is this Elizabethan theater.
okay, I see what you, okay. Okay, I see that now. I was like, I'm trying to read the, you know, scroll and read. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, just so that when folks are question, or they may come back and have a question like, why is that an issue? So are there any other comments that other panelists have?
I was just going to provide a point of clarification in terms of the scoring rubric that there is not, in any of the line items, there's not a maximum amount that an applicant can put in there, nor is there a minimum amount. So applicants have the ability to allocate how they see fit for their budget. And that certainly is a good acknowledgement of the total amount of funds versus where it's going. I think is a good note, but is not necessarily something that is a component of the scoring rubric.
Yeah, point taken. It's certainly a personal judgment on my part as a panelist.
Yeah, and so I think when we're stating that, I think we've also then, TJ, it's important to then think about the biases that might be included in that, in your take on that, because, you know, then you might need to really focus on what is the rubric asking, and what did the question ask, and did they supply that information, as opposed to you don't agree with where the funds are going. So
certainly, and they actually scored quite high on the budget in my estimation because of the granularity of the budget. I just want to bring to the panelists' attention, you know, follow the money. Where is this money going?
okay, so yeah, it wasn't coming across that's what you were saying. So are there any other comments that any other panelist?
Okay, Seeing no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. Okay, if everyone's ready, we'll move on to the next application. It's Andrea Aerial Dance Theater. Emily is the primary and Cynthia is the secondary. Emily, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer. Go ahead.
Thank you. This dance group has been serving the Austin dance community for 34 years. Multidisciplinary dance performances based heavily in inclusivity. They called out several specific community partners that they've been working with, such as the Carver, the Asian American Resource Center, and the Mexican American Cultural Center. As well as working with Title I schools to provide creative opportunities to the youth, empowering them and teaching them self-expression and creativity. They offer a lot of free community workshops hosted at these different community partner locations, focused on bringing in people of all different abilities and experiences, and kind of connecting them again through self-expression, sharing stories, and just bringing different communities together through dance, the art of dance. I don't believe they named any specific board members except for the owner, but they did acknowledge the importance of having decision makers from a variety of backgrounds. And to quote them, they said they have built an ensemble that includes Latino, Asian, Indian, Black, and LGBTQIA artists to broaden the scope of our work and reflect the community in which we live. And I just appreciate acknowledging something that they want to reflect the community of Austin. Again, I think that's kind of pretty integral to what this grant is looking for. And their proposed programming does focus on a wide variety of community partnerships, and they aim to facilitate a deeper understanding of different cultures and traditions as they relate to identity, both for individuals and at the community level. I feel like their goal is not only for people to hear these voices, but also for them to be celebrated and embraced and kind of share them in a way that is very positive and again, inclusive and welcoming to all people. Specifically, their Here Now program, I think, reflects a deep understanding of intersectionality and its importance in creating community connections. As far as accessibility, they do have a staffing plan for folks who need assistance on site at performances and events, and they offer an ASL interpreter for one performance of each program, I believe. Their movement-based workshops are designed for folks of every level of experience and ability, and I believe they do offer adaptations for folks who may be differently abled. They have translators for multiple languages. I believe they mentioned Spanish, Mandarin, and Hindi. And I felt that their marketing plan was strong as well, again, utilizing those free community partnerships and the relationships they have built within Austin. And I think that their relationships and community connections reflect an understanding of the need of their key constituents.
Yeah, I largely agree. I think this was a really strong application, and it's clear that the dance company's mission is rooted in engaging and uplifting the BIPOC community. And I think their accessibility, both in terms of like physical accessibility as well as language accessibility, were really strong. Emily touched on those. The only other thing that I would want to like also call out is in the leadership description, they talk about Andrea herself, and then they mention their board of directors and they talk about them like their artistic and professional experience, but they don't really explain who any of these people are or their lived experience. And then they do mention that the ensemble includes, you know, the BIPOC and LGBTQ community, but they don't really say how many people is that? Is that one person? Is that two? Is it 50? I have no idea. And it doesn't really explain how the ensemble is involved in decision making. So are these people that are just kind of performers, or are they also involved in other aspects? So that was really the only part that I thought could have made the application perfect, really. Otherwise, I think it's quite strong.
Thank you. I'd like to invite other panelists to add any additional comments.
All right, seeing no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. All right, is everyone ready to go to the next application? Great. Okay, up next is Deaf Film Festival. TJ is the primary, Emily is the secondary. Let me reset the timer. All right, TJ, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer.
So this was a really fun application. I thought a very unique concept, and I really hope that if anyone from the Deaf Film Festival is watching this panel, that you're using some kind of speech to text translator or something, because I want you to be able to hear my comments here. Excuse me. I want you to be able to understand my comments on your application. So the Deaf Film Festival was awarded the Elevate grant last year. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a film festival for films by deaf filmmakers. And, you know, in my estimation, this application was very cut and dry as far as it relates to the city rubric. It was incredibly easy to score this in almost all of the categories. I did want to say, and maybe my other panelists will have some insight into this portion of the application, that it feels very strange to ask a disabled applicant to make accessibility accommodations for their festival. I would presume that it's kind of already built in, and they do have, you know, some accommodations. They are mindful of the deaf blind community and are looking into accommodations for deaf blind interpreters for the screenings as well. And they require all of their films to be subtitled as well. So there's a little bit of accessibility built into this application. My one critique of the application, and unfortunately it's a spot where you missed out on a lot of points here, is that your marketing plan section doesn't really have anything to do with marketing your festival. You talk about making the festival affordable for submitters, for people who are going to be submitting films, because that is a very expensive part of the filmmaking process. But there's zero information in here about how you're going to promote this deaf film festival to Austinites, to tourists, to non-deaf people, to anyone. I was not able to judge your marketing plan at all, because there doesn't appear to be one per this application. That being said, it was a real shame to have to score that section low, because I really thought highly of this application, and I scored it highly on almost every other category.
Yeah, that was my exact same feedback as well. I just don't know if it was a misunderstanding of the question or just wanting to maybe emphasize some more of the accessibility that they didn't have room for in another area of the application, but the marketing just really wasn't touched on at all. Even going down to the budget, you know, there is a line item for the marketing, but it's really just internal stuff such as the website, photography, and the very vague advertisement fees. So yeah, that would be the main thing that they lost points on with me as well.
Thank you, Emily. Would like to invite other panelists to add any additional comments that you may have.
Just comment in regard to the criteria. And, you know, this question has come up many times in different settings, but so are there, because basically, well, in looking at how to score their application, their primary constituency is deaf individuals. Okay, and so if that is the case, then is there, how are they outreaching to tourists? How do they outreach to other communities, or if it's even necessary, because it was like the question I was kind of thinking about earlier, is there a quantifiable measure for what is considered these intersectionality, these criteria, criteria for Austin, for the city of Austin? And I mean, this is something that will come up all the time in looking at how we judge these applications. You know, because they're like their group is just inherently part of the criteria. However, do they also have a responsibility to outreach to other groups that are not part of their group? If I'm being clear as mud.
Yes.
So,
So I think Anne Marie spoke to this for another question. Oh, I lost my train of thought. It's gone. Oh.
Okay, and so if it's not, then I just want to be clear that it's
yeah.
not.
So there is requirement for tourism outreach. Sorry,
Mhm.
and then there is a specific question where it asks, how are you going to in the marketing? And I think TJ and Emily spoke to this, that there's it looks like there might have been a misunderstanding of the question. I'm not sure. Like, how are you going to reach new audiences? And so new could mean many things, because what we also think about in terms of access to the arts is you have key constituents, but how are you also inviting other people? Because not only deaf folks are interested in seeing deaf films, films by, for, and about deaf folks, other folks are as well would be interested. I've attended deaf performances and things and like that in the past. And so I think, you know, just speaking to that may not be who their key constituents are, but they could also, you know, and we don't want them to move away from their key constituents, but because the question asks, how are you going to reach new audiences? Then it sounds like they could have spoke to that to make the application stronger from what I'm hearing.
Thank you.
And then I just want to speak to the comment that TJ made about asking them about accessibility. I think because accessibility includes a lot more than the hearing disabled, then there are ways in which they, of course, could ensure that someone who you know has mobility issues, or who you know, there are additional disabilities that one may have beyond hearing, and, you know, being hearing impaired, you know, not being able to hear, deaf, that they could also, because people could have multiple disabilities. So is a hand, okay, like I see a hand somewhere. Dylan.
Hi, if I put something, comment in the chat, can the public read it?
Yeah, can we not do that, Dylan? Are you trying to
Like, so that the people who are part of the applicants for this could read it instead of other ways of understanding what we're saying. If I put my
I
comment
think
in the
I'm the
chat.
only one who can chat out to the public, but you can put it in the chat and I'll share it out.
And there is also, within the Zoom, there is closed captioning. So if someone is wanting to turn that on, that's available. Other questions or comments? We have about a minute and a half left. Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. All right. Is everyone ready to move on to the next application? Great. How about you, Emily? Are you all set? Okay. Austin Rainbow Theater 2025 program. Veronica is the primary. TJ is the secondary. Let me make sure the timer is all set. Timer set. So whenever you're ready, Veronica, I will start the timer.
Austin Rainbow Theater claims to be the only theater company in Central Texas exclusively focused on LGBTQIA+ programming. I was not able to fact check that. I'm going to take them at their word. As far as I could tell, they were a relatively new organization. It seemed like last year was their first full theatrical season. They are requesting $80,000 in support of their upcoming 2025 season, which, as listed in the application, includes 2 productions, which are centered on the gender expansive community, employing gender expansive individuals both on and off the stage, and with the productions themselves being themed around things that are important to that community. Overall, I found this to be a relatively high scoring application. One of the things I really appreciated was they sort of had like a data driven approach to the application overall. They not only provided specific demographics in regard to the board, the directors, and the crew, but they also had some like community statistics, you know, like studies show that this is why this is important, which really helped to emphasize the importance and the urgency of their mission. And that level of specificity and awareness stood out to me just as someone scoring these. It's helpful to have it, you know, out there in a way that you can understand very clearly. I also really appreciated that they focused on equitable compensation. One of the core goals of the Elevate program is to ensure that creatives can afford to stay and live and work in Austin. And yes, you can pay people and that's great, but to pay them fairly for the work that they're actually doing is outstanding, and not always the case, even in people who are not getting city funds. Artists tend to be undercompensated. All right, off the soapbox. They also had really clear objectives and actionable plans sort of throughout. They really had, you know, just sort of a dedication to serving their personal key constituencies. And that was relevant to the granting program. I also appreciated the commitment to accessibility in terms of having like every Sunday performance having an ASL interpreter. So, you know, if someone has a conflict, they don't have to choose, well, I guess I just don't ever get to see this play in a way that I can understand. It's not that hard. So I was very glad that they were doing that. I did feel that some of the specificity that was present in the application overall was maybe lacking in the language accessibility portion. They did note that they were going to collaborate with local Spanish-speaking theater artists, but it was a little bit vague about how that was going to go, who these people were, what the future productions in the second language might look like. So just some more concrete details there. I also noticed that, you know, the queer community, in terms of how my understanding of the rubric, is one which has been historically marginalized, but is not necessarily at risk for cultural erasure. So that puts this more in like sort of the medium as opposed to the high scoring. There's absolutely intersectionality there. I do think that they could have made that more present in the application itself in order to push the score overall a little bit higher, if it is indeed present within the company. Overall, it was a strong application. They have multiple checkpoints in place to ensure they're accountable to their communities, and they seem pretty well aligned with the goals of the Elevate program.
Yeah, Veronica has covered all of the bases that I would even deign to cover. This is a great application. It scored very highly with me as well. The only constructive criticism that I might give if you are watching Austin Rainbow Theater, and I've said this a couple of times earlier today, is that when we get to our marketing section and we think about how we market these events to the public, I think because we all live our lives on our phones and our screens, it's easy to forget that Austin is chock full of more traditional press outlets. And so I would have liked to see more of a plan for traditional marketing in addition to all of the great digital marketing that you're doing. But other than that, this is a great application, and I think it absolutely reflects the city's priorities in my estimation, and it scored highly for me.
Thank you, TJ. Any other panelists like to add any additional comments?
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, go ahead and finalize your scores. And once you're done with that, we'll move into our afternoon break. We'll take 15 minutes. So if you'll return by 2:17, we'll start again with the last, what is this, 5 applications of the day. All right, see you at, well, let's make it 2:18. I'll be generous. Give you 1 more minute. All right, looks like here. Up next is Black History Bike Ride. Gail is the primary, Veronica is the secondary. I have the timer all set, so Gail, whenever you're ready, you may begin. I'll start the timer when you begin speaking. Oh, you're muted.
All right. So the Black History Bike Ride is, well, the documentary will create a film about the Black History Bike Ride project. So it shows since summer 2020, the Black History Bike Ride has executed multiple rides a year where local Black community members, authors, historians, musicians, and council members have been invited to speak to attendees about the history, present, and future of historic Black neighborhoods in Austin. So its creative mission is to engage and inspire Austin locals through public events and documentary film projects. They've got 5 years of large public events under their belt and 1 year film production. So they provide a space for Black artists who otherwise operate alone to come together and collaborate and learn together. So the organization, the Black History Bike Ride started in 2020 in the wake of protests over George Floyd's murder, when social historian and avid biker Talib Abdullahi invited friends to join him on a bike ride around Houston. So he expected a dozen folks to come, and through word of mouth, there were over 400 people that participated. So seeing the need, they wanted to reach out and start and look at expanding their outreach through documentary film. They talk about their collaborations with or partnerships with different organizations. 16 Square, which is a nonprofit that works to preserve the legacy of African Americans in Central East Austin. I think it's part of the cultural district. And so they will serve, they have served as their fiscal sponsor, but now they have their own 501c3. The leadership, the decision-making power is with the founder and partners. Ariel and partners have been part of the Black community in Austin for as long as 15 years and aim to share the identity of Black Austin with the many Austinites who lack knowledge of Black cultural history in their own town. So they have a wide-ranging advisory board that includes Black historians and community members. They're volunteer cultural advisors that help with the social bike rides and community arts events ranging of race, gender, and sexual identity. This particular project is to film the place where they have the short documentary about Juneteenth, where that started, and create this documentary about the Juneteenth ride. So it will encompass all of the rides that they have done and this history in a premiere of the film. Let's see, is there anything else? When they talk about their bike ride, the accessibility of their of the bike rides and the film, all of their films will have subtitles, and they plan to use these grant funds to provide subtitles in multiple languages, specifically in Spanish. They also, with their accessibility for their bike rides, they always have pedicabs available for anyone who's not able or not wanting to bike. So the social and film places are ADA accessible and ensure that lighting and sound are at reasonable levels. So their marketing is mostly electronic. So just as Dylan, I think Dylan or TJ or something, you mentioned that Austin still has a lot of other types, print and other traditional types of marketing, so that could be beneficial to them. The budget does, it reflects the guidelines for the budget, and actually their project budget is $150,000. So we're not sure exactly how they do cover artists, payments to artists and admin, marketing, production fees, and accessibility services. Okay. All right, I think I'm done. Yeah, I scored, their score was in the higher percentile, because I think they covered most of these things. I guess this is the same when we talk about quantifying who is served. This doesn't necessarily, although this is this is to present the history of Black Austin. This is beneficial to residents of Austin and tourists in Austin, because it's not a well-known, the history is not well known, and the Black history is not well known in Austin. So I think it fits these criteria. That's it for me.
I agree with a lot of what Gail said. This is one of those organizations that, from its inception was focused on serving these priority key constituencies that are associated with the grant. I appreciated their thoughtful approach to inclusivity on the rides, with offering pedicabs, ways for people who bike is not something they can do to participate. I liked that they had a plan for expanded language access with the documentary. I was curious about expanded language access on the tours themselves. If something like that is happening, it was not noted in the grant, and I thought that was perhaps a missed opportunity to have language interpretation actually on the tour, so that that was accessible to a wider swath of people from different communities throughout our city. Overall, I thought it was a strong application. They were accountable to their key constituencies. They had a really thoughtful approach to partnerships and an event structure, and I thought they seemed well aligned with the goals of the Elevate program.
Veronica, I'd like to invite other panelists to add any additional comments. Oh, TJ?
Yeah, I know we just have 2 minutes here now, so I'm going to be brief, but I also thought this was an incredible application, truly deserving of city money. It speaks to so many things that I love, like bicycling and history and filmmaking. I did notice that there was a little bit of a discrepancy on the budget, that your budget added up to $150,000. It should have added up to $80,000. So I hope you are not disqualified on this point alone, because I think it's a fantastic project.
Looks like TJ may have lost internet access. I will address his point or concern about the applicant's budget being $150,000. I believe this applicant initially requested to apply in Thrive, but they did not meet the eligibility requirement. And so were moved into Elevate. So they would be eligible for $80,000, and then they would, if awarded, they would be able to adjust their budget to reflect a different award amount based on if they score high enough to receive funding. It is not a disqualifying factor. Let's see. We may need to pause here. Oh, TJ's back. Great.
I'm back, but I don't want to take up any more time if anybody else had comments.
Do you want to just say what you said, Anne-Marie? Or
Yeah, I will. So the applicant will not be disqualified for having a budget total over the request amount. That's not an issue. It's also not an issue if an applicant has a budget under the request amount.
it's because they applied for the Thrive grant and then weren't eligible and were moved over there, and so you could apply for 150.
Okay, we are at time. Go ahead and finalize your scores. Okay, if everyone's ready, we'll move on to the next application. The Violet Crown Players 24-25 dance theater season. Dylan is the primary, Gail is the secondary. Let me update the timer. All right, Dylan, whenever you're ready, you may begin. You're muted.
The Violet Crown Players Parents Diverse Space Youth Dance Theater. Together, they provide an opportunity for youth from all backgrounds to engage in internationally acclaimed dance, training, and productions. Their young artists participate in professional performances that focus on artistic integrity, community integration, that's great. They build the confidence and the link to the future in dance. They work with kids range 8 to 11, and on a separate project 11 to 14, and then on yet another separate project 14 to 19. They also hire adult dancers up to age 85. They work with the Austin School District and other organizations to reach young artists they could not normally afford to be involved in a professional dance setting. They sponsor Learning to Dance, Dancing to Learn in schools, in the public schools. So kind of opening the door for young people to become involved in dance. They work with immigrant children in this one project titled Mi Otro Voz. Yeah. And it seems like they have like it could be inferred that their constituencies are serving priority constituencies for the grant, but it's not explicitly stated. And so in every section, they could almost every section, they could have gotten a much stronger application if they would have explicitly stated that they work with constituencies that are a risk of displacement or cultural erasure in Austin, which they don't really do, unfortunately. So I infer that because of that one project they mentioned there and some other things that they are working with constituencies like that. But it's hard for me to research it and look it all up. They seem to have a very professional leadership. Their cultural leadership, the individuals seem to be very successful, but not necessarily with a lived experience of being a constituency that's a risk of a cultural erasure or displacement from Austin. Maybe the opposite of that. Uh, Cultural activities. They have a very thorough explanation. It's very good about the what kind of performances that they are planning to do through 2025. And they're free and open to the public, which is great, and that's very inclusive. So that's awesome. First three performances uh, present different stages of the development in the yearly theme. So they have like an ongoing theme throughout the year, which is I think is cool, but it's neither here nor there regarding the priorities of the grant. One of the performances will be held at Peace Park, so I think that's really inclusive and really open to public and to the tourist constituency also. So they're very well spoken or well written in their proposal. And I think that it's admirable to strive for diversity, but I didn't find much evidence of the diversity that project is reaching for manifested in the supporting documentation, social media, or the website of the organization. And so I would say, like, if they had more of a consideration of equity and importance of that in the development of their continuing projects, that would have been a much stronger proposal. And maybe some of the other panelists have a different opinion, but I was unable to find evidence of the diversity that cited or showed explicit demographics, which are the priority constituencies according to the grant guidelines. So that's what I've got.
And I agree with Dylan. They have well, I think it was heavy, either rely heavily on their artistic director. And I think a little more description of who makes decisions of their board or volunteer board or whatever, whoever it is that is also part of the decision making. I think the grant writing could have been a little more concise to describe those constituencies and how the programming, how they outreach to those other communities. And it's said it seemed like there are some assumptions that were made about the knowledge and familiarity of the terms and teaching processes mentioned in the narrative. So there were some things that I wasn't familiar with, and they were not explained. And also I thought that the language accessibility, I thought that was very ambitious, as they listed about 13 or 14 different languages that they'll use in performance. So that seemed a little ambitious, but I'm not sure of how they were intending to use it. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Gail. I'd like to invite other panelists.
I was struck by how in the general accessibility that they had partnered with ArtSpark Texas to start to develop a curriculum for people who had mobility issues and to be able to include them in the dance community. I thought that was really notable, and that one of the things that they were trying to do is kind of like codify that curriculum and then bring it to wider audiences. Dance can really feel exclusionary for anyone who has any sort of challenges with their own body. And so the fact that they were specifically trying to outreach to that community, I thought was impactful and very thoughtful.
Anyone else? I will say that they mentioned their partnership with Immigrant Services Network of Austin, and I think that's the place where they're trying to talk about the language access listing all of those. But talking more about that partnership, I think would have strengthened that. Like Gail was saying, it's like, what is the part? I mean, Immigrant Services Network of Austin does a lot of things, but I also know they provide translation and interpretation. So a little more there. Anything else?
Okay, please finalize your scores. Okay, is everyone good to go? Great. All right, perform a dance. Cynthia is the primary, Dylan is the secondary. Cynthia, whenever you're ready, you may begin speaking and I'll start the timer.
Okay, Perform a Dance presents exploratory original dance performances that focus on the works of women, BIPOC, and LGBTQ choreographers. And they're requesting not the full amount, which I thought was interesting, but 68,000 to put on a work called Oh, the Humanity, Brittle Brushes, and the Anthropocene. A collaborative piece made with 8 different artists who come from a variety of communities within Central Texas. What I liked about their application was their strong focus on the LGBTQ and BIPOC communities that was rooted throughout the mission's founding. I mean, the organization's mission and founding, the programming, the leadership, just in all aspects. You could see that that was reflective of that focus was reflected across the application. And I like that they not only employed people of color, for example, as dancers, but also as creators of the works themselves and leaders in the org. So they got pretty high scores for me across those categories. The only one that I thought they maybe could have used a little bit of improvement was the marketing. Let me pull up my note. It had like a strong multimedia aspect to it. Like there were the chronicle, like print media, social media, TV, like all kinds of things, but I think there wasn't enough specificity of effort in order to reach out to non-English speaking communities or the disabled community, which I thought was a little bit disappointing given how much of the rest of their application really does focus on that. Like they have strong accessibility and language accommodations otherwise. So I thought that that would be the only part really where I might want to add some thought in terms of the marketing, but otherwise I thought it was a very strong application.
I agree with Cynthia's assessment. And I feel like their intersectionality response was exceptionally showed exceptional consideration for equity and for inclusivity. Really was very considerate and well thought out. Also their accessibility section, always accessible for those with mobility challenges. Of course, they're concerned about their budget, and that's one of the reasons why they're applying for the grant, is to be able to expand in that way amongst other plans they have for their project. And they also have ASL interpreted performance, large print programs to help those who are visually challenged. And they also provide like specific examples to like especially in the intersectionality, but also in the accessibility sections of people that they're working with in order to bring those aspects into their project. And yeah, the only things I would say is like for the as far as the marketing is to since you have all these plans to assist people who are face various challenges of the disability community, is to actually go ahead and make a plan to reach out to those people, and also efforts to reach tourists. That's what I got.
Any additional comments?
Since we are allowed to count firsthand experience, I just would like to take a second to say I was present at a performance of Finding Alice, which was one of their recent things, not part of this particular funding request, but just a historical thing, and really diverse audience. And the presentation itself sparked a lot of interesting conversation amongst the group of people I was with. We all interpreted it differently and it spoke to us differently, but it was very deep for a dance performance. So I feel it's not just words on the page for me. I've also had lived experience seeing how that affects the community that they're presenting these works to, and the diversity of people that were involved in them, both in the audience and on stage.
Thank you, Veronica. Any additional comments from other panelists?
Okay, seeing none, you may go ahead and finalize your scores. And as you're finalizing those scores, if you'll go ahead and pull up Different Stages Inc. Emily is the primary, Cynthia is the secondary. I'll give just another moment for folks to finalize their scores before we jump into that one. Okay, if everyone's ready. All right, Emily, take it away.
Okay. Different Stages was founded in 1985 as a theater company devoted to the Austin community at large and to producing balanced seasons featuring classic plays as well as new and original works. Overall, I felt this application spoke very broadly about the work they do, and I wasn't really able to target who exactly their key constituencies are outside of the artists and actors that they work with. They mentioned several times that they're making programming for everyone, the Austin community at large. I don't think they ever got too specific about reaching out to these key constituencies that the city is looking to support. There does seem to be improvement in recent years as to the diversity of works presented by the organization, but I just didn't get the feeling that intersectionality and inclusivity is a core value for them. There was a lot of talk of reaching out to these people, but no specific mention of how they are contacting them or what community partnerships or specifics relating to how they're engaging these underrepresented groups. Similarly, their cultural leadership response gave us just a list of demographics of their board members, which didn't include a lot of non-white folks, and it didn't also give much information as to these folks' relationships to the community. It really was just kind of like names and ages and races and just not really anything deeper than that, which I would have really liked to see. Um, I think the activities they were proposing do bring in some more of these key constituencies, specifically the Latin community. But again, it just felt very broad the whole time. And to specifically quote the rubric, it doesn't feel fully integrated or accountable to those communities. Let's see, what other notes did I make? Yeah, I just think I would have liked to see more specifics relating to how they plan to reach out to these communities, be that through community partnerships or different media relationships. Um, the accessibility accommodations do appear to be by request only, which is, not nothing, but they do provide ASL performance for each production. But in general, it seemed more like relying on the venues to provide these accessibilities. The marketing response also felt incomplete to me. They only answered the first two portions. They didn't have a specific marketing plan for tourists or folks with disabilities or non-English speakers. And that to me didn't really make sense, as the marketing budget was pretty high. I think it was around 15K, and 10,000 of that was just for display ads, which felt a little vague. So for the lack of specificity in the marketing plan, just I feel like it was kind of not fully answered.
Yeah, I feel like Emily kind of took a lot of the words right out of my mouth. I think there was a lot of language that kind of talked about, the communities that we're trying to prioritize here, but there wasn't a lot of substance behind some of it. So I would have liked a little bit more intentionality and thoughtfulness around not just sort of naming demographics and kind of ticking boxes, but really speaking to how that is incorporated into the actual work of different stages. And I agree, the accessibility felt like a place where they could have improved by having beyond just at request or one performance. It felt like they talked a little bit about like having open auditions or blind auditions, which is something, but it felt more like surface level rather than meaningful in terms of all the different accommodations or the inclusion efforts.
Thank you, Cynthia. Would like to invite other panelists to add any additional comments.
Okay, you may finalize your scores. All right, if everyone's finalized their scores, we can move on to the next application, Austin Civic Wind Ensemble. TJ is the primary, Emily is the secondary. I have the timer all pulled up, so TJ, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the recording. I mean, the timer.
So the Austin Civic Wind Ensemble is a 50-year running organization here in Austin. So my hat's off to them for half a century of music performance. What they do is right there in the name. They are a civic ensemble, which means that they are open to citizen musicians of Austin. They have an open membership policy, which means if you play an instrument, you may join. I imagine there are some other criteria, maybe some membership fees, but the important thing to note is that they offer a platform and an organization for people for whom music might have been an important part of their education or upbringing, but they're not professional musicians per se. And I think that's a really important component of public music performance, is an opportunity for anybody to be able to perform and practice music. So they are seeking funding for their next season of concerts, which according to them would comprise 10 to 13 public concerts and 2 private concerts. They do concerts in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. So there's a little bit of community service involved in here. However, as far as this application goes, and as far as it relates to the Elevate grant, I found their overall approach to be a little bit too broad for what the city is trying to prioritize with these funds. They don't particularly serve a marginalized or underserved community, although you can maybe infer from the nature of their organization that those people would be welcome to perform in the wind ensemble. There's nothing in specific about this application that puts those communities at the forefront, or indeed creates content for and by those communities. So I'm not really sure that this application is a good fit for this grant. Where they could have scored some more points in the marketing and budget is always, in my perspective, an easy way to get a top score, because if you can just present a kind of coherent marketing plan and budget plan, there's no reason you shouldn't get all those points. But their marketing plan is not really existent for this application. They, to quote them, they consider marketing to be an area of largely untapped potential. Okay, so here's an opportunity to describe how you might tap that potential, and they don't take that opportunity here. So there really is no marketing effort demonstrated. And then as far as the budget goes, there were a little bit of concerns on my end as to how they were allocating some of this money. For example, they put a stipend for uniforms and for recording costs in their marketing category, and neither of those things has anything to do with marketing. So yeah, they also did not score too highly from me in the budget category as well. My final comments, just to end on a positive note. Overall, they have an admirable history in Austin of 50 years. They participate in some of the most iconic yearly events like the tree lighting in Zilker. But the overall broadness of this application, I think, does not speak to the priorities of the city at this time.
I completely agree. That was my biggest takeaway from this as well. I think diversity can mean different things to different people, and this specific application, I think, took diversity to mean diversity of ages and skill sets of participants, but they weren't really capturing the priority constituencies here that the city is looking to support.
Thank you, Emily. Are there any other additional comments that folks would like to add from the panel? Dylan?
Yeah, I wanted to address their intersectionality and inclusion response. Just in case any of y'all are listening, I think that you have an opportunity here with the Civic Wind Ensemble for addressing historical equity issues. I thought it was really great that that whoever was filling out the grant honestly addressed it, and that they weren't familiar with composers of the constituencies that is currently prioritized by the grant. So they, in a way, acknowledged that they felt like it would be tokenism for them to pick a work by a composer that was, say, a person of color or other constituency that's in the um, priority categories. But I would encourage you to go a bit deeper, because there are a lot of composers throughout the history of this country and the world that faced bigotry and racism, and were able to rise above that situation for their works to be published and to continue on in the repertoires of various ensembles throughout the world and in this country too. So, of course, Scott Joplin, Florence Price, William Grant Still. There's many composers that would be contemporary with the repertoire of this Austin Civic Wind Ensemble that could be given more attention and could put the Civic Wind Ensemble in alignment with the priorities of the city.
I was a bit struck in a positive way by their approach to accessibility. They're one of the only applications that considered shade, distance to bathrooms, how easy it is to get from the parking lot to the venue. You could tell that these were things that their membership had lived experiencing, because you don't really think about it if you're not like, oh my gosh, it's so far, I'm not going to make it because I have this issue, you know? And so I just wanted to kind of give them props for their thoughtful approach to accessibility in that way, and making sure that accessibility wasn't just for the attending audiences, but also for their performers themselves. And noting that, you know, the needs of the percussionist are different from the needs of the clarinetist, and that they have many members who are hard of hearing because of a background in the military. And I just wanted to, you know, give them their props for that, because I thought that was a very thoughtful and thorough approach in that particular section.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add?
Okay, please finalize your scores. This is our final application to review for today. The panel will log out of this session and then log back in using the same link that you logged in earlier today, so we can do a final debrief. You can stop the recording. Thank you.